I'm Greg Giuliano. I'm an executive coach, organizational change consultant, and author. I believe leaders have the power to shape the future and change people's lives. I also believe people who challenge the status quo and go beyond usual and ordinary are rare. They're willing to go to the edge and push farther, over and over again. When I find these ultra leaders, I love to talk with them. In each episode, I talk with ultra leaders to learn how they do what they do and how they keep growing as leaders. I promise you a full dose of ultra leadership from other ultra leaders just like you in every conversation. We're at the edge of another episode. Let's jump in. Welcome to Ultra Leadership. I'm Greg Giuliano, and I am here today with Tiffany Clark. Tiffany is Global Head of People Solutions and Wellbeing at S&amp Global. Tiffany shapes the strategic direction of people services, health and financial well-being, product delivery, and technology initiatives to enhance the employee experience for over 35,000 professionals across 44 countries. With a decade-long career in global human resources, Tiffany is recognized for leading high-performance teams and driving innovation with specialties in digital transformation, process optimization, and data-driven strategic planning. I'm thrilled to have her here today, and welcome, Tiffany.
Thank you for having me, Greg. I'm excited to be here.
I am thrilled to have you here. We're going to talk about something that I am really passionate about, and that is really people owning their experience in life in general, but in the workplace especially. So you and I were talking a little bit about your journey inside organizations and the journey to leadership. So I would love to start there. So tell me a little bit about your journey to becoming the leader that you are today.
Yeah, so I actually have a very interesting journey where I wasn't one of those individuals who said I wanted to be a manager or a people leader. I was very content being an individual contributor. I knew exactly what I was responsible for, myself and my work. I was okay with, taking directions from, leaders or other individuals. And I was actually okay what I would call like sitting behind the scenes, right? I was very comfortable sitting behind the scenes. But, I kind of organically moved into what I would call a people leader role, just being recognized, right, by, leaders around me, right? And so it was funny because I was on a call, we were doing like some type of transition project, and I was being an individual contributor. I was listening, I was hearing what was going on, I was listening to everybody talk, and there was like a conflict that they just could not get past, right? The leaders in the room just could not get past the conflict. And really, in a spirit of really frustration, I was like, this is what's happening, this is what they're saying, and this is what we need to do to get this, get over this roadblock. And, post that call, my leader at the time, my SVP at the time, reached out to me and said, hey, like there's this open role. Why don't you apply for it? And I actually laughed. I actually was like, why would I do that? Right? Like, I'm like, it was a global role. It was, having a larger remit than I've ever been responsible for, different people, different backgrounds. And I was like, why would I do that? Like, I'm okay with where I am. And, and she just kept saying, like, I don't think you realize like what you have in you, or I don't think you realize like what you have in you. And I was like, I don't want to be responsible for other people. But you know what? Like, let me step out of my comfort zone. Let me apply. And I was like, Tiff, just apply for the role. Like, you apply, you get it. Okay. You don't, like, you're perfectly content with your job that you have now too. So I applied, and it led me to where I am. So it kind of started off with a global team with about 30 to 40 people that continued to accrete along the way, where it expanded from 30 to 40 to about like 80 to 100 into now where I am today with 170 people responsible for different functions within, the HR department at my organization. And so that's kind of what led me into my journey of being a people leader, is not actually even wanting to be one.
So, but it's fascinating to me that I believe that in so many meetings and instances inside organizations, there are moments where there's a gap, what I call a leadership void, and somebody has to step in, right? That's what leaders do. They see that gap, they see that void, and they step in. And you stepped in push yourself out of your comfort zone. You took that step, past the edge, through the fear, and somebody said, "Oh, there's a leader."
And it's very interesting that you said that, because in that moment, that wasn't even my intention, right? It wasn't the intention of being a leader in that moment. It was an intention of like, we have 15 minutes left in this call. We haven't gotten anywhere. And like, I want to move forward, right? And you guys haven't been able to accomplish that. And I think when somebody else saw it in me, it helped me kind of see some traits that I didn't even recognize that were within myself, right? And, it kind of helped me kind of reflect back in my past and say, well, wait, there's been numerous occasions where I've shown up, as a leader, maybe not have necessarily had the title, which I think is, something we'll talk about is, title is just a title. It has nothing to do with the character being a leader. But yeah, and that's kind of what triggered it. And I would say that's kind of what set off the trajectory of, kind of expanding my roles and my responsibility as being a leader.
You're right. It has nothing to do with title. That anybody in a meeting, and there's lots of us are sitting in meetings all the time. And if you're in there and you don't find an opportunity to insert yourself into the conversation, at some point, somebody's going to say, why the heck is Tiffany even in this meeting? She doesn't, right? So you saw that opportunity. And I coach folks who are like you were, an individual contributor sitting in a meeting, to look for those insertion points to say, oh, here's what I hear. Here's what I'm thinking, and toss a question back into the room just to demonstrate that you're there, you're listening, you're thinking, and you're curious. And even that can get you noticed.
Absolutely.
So that's your journey. And you work with a lot of folks coming up in your organization. You're trying to build bench strength and help people to develop. And part of our development is also paying attention to our career. Like, you got lucky in that moment. Somebody noticed you and said something to you and asked you to take that next step. How do you advise younger people in your organization about being more intentional about owning their development and owning their career?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And it's something I focus on a lot, not only with the younger generation, but also with my current team members, is understanding where is that inflection point? Where's that point where somebody is going to be able to call you out, and making sure that you give yourselves those opportunities. So even as an individual contributor, when I wasn't necessarily interested in being a leader, I was always curious, right? I was always asking questions about why something was done a certain way, even if it had nothing to do with me. Like, I was like, I don't need to know this, but I want to know this. So can you explain this to me? And so I realized people love being able to share what they do, right? People love actually being able to share knowledge, especially to somebody that genuinely wants to know and understand the knowledge, right? There's no ill intention behind it. It's genuine curiosity. And I also think that when I talk to people about growth and development, I say growth and development isn't always equal to promotion. And I think we confuse the two, right? We assume that I'm not growing and developing if I haven't been promoted at my organization. I don't have a new grade number. I don't have a new title. I don't have a new comp. So that means I'm stagnant. And they're not one and the same. You can continue to grow and develop all the time. And so how do you do that is, kind of what you said is making yourself available, is when opportunities come up, don't always tag an opportunity to a price tag, right? Tag it to, how do I learn from this? What am I going to get from this? Is it networking? Is it exposure? Is it, knowledge to maybe something that I was unfamiliar with? And I think that was something that I did very early on in my career. Again, not even knowingly did it, was just like when opportunities would come up, I'd be like, well, hey, I'll try it. Or can I test that out? Or when we had rotational programs, at our company, where we're doing a pilot rotational program, they're like, well, you'll have to do this in addition to your other job. And I was like, okay, like what's an extra 10, 20%? Because I'm curious about what that function does and how they operate, and pretty sure that there's something that I can learn from it. And so that's what I always encourage people is, don't look at growth and development equal to a price tag. Growth and development is like, what do you gain out of it? And what are you able to take along with you on that journey? And there's not always a monetary equation to that.
Well, it's not a means to an end. It is, but it's an end in itself, right? Everything is learning. So what do I want to learn now? And I think that it sounds like what you're doing with folks is helping them be more intentional about, so I know how your story started. How does the story end? Because the next step might not be a promotion, or you might get promoted, but it's the wrong role because it's not a step towards how you think your story is going to end. So how do you help people be more intentional about connecting? Well, here's where I started, but here's where I want to end up, so that they can take what's the best next role, not just the obvious, oh yeah, I'll take that, because maybe they don't need that. It doesn't close a knowledge or an experience gap to help them get to where they ultimately want to get to.
Yeah, so I actually do this thing with my team, and we call it like their career journey. So when I do career conversations, as my team started to grow, I'm always looking at different ways to do things. Right? One, I'm also like to be a rebel, right? I like to challenge the status quo. I was like, I don't want to have a typical career conversation and just go, what do you want to do? What do you like to do? How can I help you get there? I was more like, I want to know about this person. I want to know how they ended up in this seat today, because I know my journey, right? I know how I ended up in this seat today. I know how I made the decisions that I made, which ultimately influence a lot of things. I want to know this about my people, because then it helps me help them truly. And so I take this approach where I go, give me your past, your present, and your future. And so it kind of came from, I like to watch a lot of different movies. It's like one of the Christmas Story, right? Where they Scrooge is like, oh, and it's like, how did he get here, right? So what's the context behind it? And so first, their past, right? Okay, where did you, what did you major in college, right? Why did you pick that major, right? What did you think that you were going to do post college, and that's why you specialized in that major? Then what was your career journey after you left college, right? Why did you take those roles? What did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? So that's one conversation. So in that one conversation, I'm like, just tell me your past. That's it. Then we end it. The next conversation, so it's a series of 3. Okay, we talked about your past. We talked about how you got here. Tell me what it is now. Like, what are you doing currently that you like? What are you doing currently that you don't like? Are you where you want to be currently? And that focus is really just on currently today, right? What are they experiencing? Because again, a lot of decisions that people make, whether professionally, there is some personal aspect, right? And then the next conversation, and then what is your future, right? So we talked about your past, right? We talked about how you got to where you are today. We talked about how you feel where you are today. So now tell me about your future. And then when we start to have those future conversations, I started to notice that people would immediately say a title, like, oh, I want to be this role, or I want to do that. And I would say, well, let's take a step back, because really what you should look at your future is when you think about a marriage, right? Or a relationship. Like when you're a kid growing up, you're thinking, well, this is what I want in a future partner. And here's my non-negotiables. And here's what I have to have. And here's what I don't want. You should have the same exact approach to your career. What are your career non-negotiables, right? What do you have to have as a part of your career? What do you not want to have? And then that opens up your opportunities a lot more, as opposed to putting yourself in a bucket. You're actually like, oh, I'm going to be able to I know my non-negotiables. I know what I like. I know what I don't like. And then that opens up so many different avenues, as opposed to just focusing on one single focal point.
You're really focusing on the experience, right? What's the experience that you want to have? You're spending a lot of hours doing a job at work. So what do you want it to be like? What's the role that will allow you to use your skills in the way that you want to use them and engage with people the way that you want to engage them, versus I want to be the CMO, or I want to be the CFO. Okay, but that role doesn't align with the experience that you and I were just talking about in terms of your non-negotiables. So are you willing to give that up? You're willing to let those go. So I love that you have those conversations, because it really gets people to think about the experience that they want to have.
Exactly. And you touched on a point that really talks about, it really allows that opportunity to say, well, why do you want to do that? Right. So even if after I have that conversation, they're still like, hey, to your point, I want to be the new CHRO. Okay, but you just told me that you don't really like to interact with people, and you're really, and you prefer to do this, and that's why you didn't choose this job back then. So like, are you sure you want to be a CHRO, right? Or there was an individual who had mentioned like he wanted a special like domain expertise type of role. And I said, okay, but like, if you do that, that only like compartmentalizes like what you do. But you just told me you really enjoyed process and operations and strategy and working with different people. I said, so there's nothing wrong with this role that you're looking and going into, but it doesn't hit all of what we talked about as your career non-negotiables. I said, so what do you think will actually happen when you get in that space? And I think it's also like, it's almost like career therapy, right? Like asking a question and giving them the opportunity to actually like reflect on their response and then go, wow, like didn't think about it that way. You're right. Like maybe I do want to look at, something different. But I also tell people like, and it's okay to try it, right? I think that's also important in regards to owning your career and owning your experience. It's like going to a restaurant, right? You've heard so many rave reviews. Everybody's talking about how great it is. You're like, I got to get in there. You fight to get the reservation. You get there and then you're like, this food sucks, right? And then and then you're like not going back there again. And I think that's the same thing with your career. Is like you are going to have to try certain things to see what you like and what you don't like. But I think that's where it really goes back to your point about owning the experience and leaning into your curiosity, and then just working with your network to really determine like what works best for you.
Yeah, well, and having those conversations regularly with people, I think helps them to own it more, but really gets them focused on, so they might have a role in mind, but it enables you as their manager to say, that's a great ambition. That's actually probably you're 2 roles away from that.
Yes.
Right? Because there's a knowledge gap or there's an experience gap that you need to close to make it really easy for the company to go, oh, totally, you're ready for this role, right? So it helps them map it out and align or set expectations for when if they're going to be in this company, when they could expect that. Now, they might say, I want to be in this kind of a role in this time frame, and hopefully it matches up with the organization's thinking. And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. And then that's part of being proactive about your career too. What happens if the company doesn't meet your timeline? You're going to hang out, or are you going to go find that role?
A decision. Yeah, you got to make a decision. And you mentioned something just about sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. And what I've also tried to explain to my team is like, sometimes it doesn't work out for the right reason, right? I was like, as a part of my career journey, I wanted to be an individual contributor. But I remember there was a particular role I was very interested in. Like I wanted to be, an HR business partner so bad. And I was like, I really want to understand what they do. And I had applied to I want to say 2 or 3 HR business partner roles, at my organization, interviewed and just never, was able to close the deal. And I was just like, what am I doing wrong? Right. And then right after that situation occurred is when the moment occurred where I was like, my people leader at the time was like, hey, apply for this position. And so I kind of look back, at my past and I go, if I would have taken that role or gotten that role, it would have been a completely different journey for me. And now I'm actually in a role that I love and it meets all of my career non-negotiables. And I'm a little closer to what that role that I was interested in does. And I'm like, wow, I would have never enjoyed that role. Like it completely didn't align with, who I am and my career non-negotiable. So, that's one of the things I also try to explain to my team too, is like, sometimes it's not a no, it's maybe like a not this or, a not right now. And I think that's also important for them, for people to be able to understand and be comfortable with as well.
Yeah, sometimes that no is a gift. It was a gift to me earlier in my career when I got a big no and like, okay. And one of my coaches way back when said, no doesn't mean no. It just means not now or not this way.
Absolutely.
You find another way. But that gift, if it points you to, okay, then how can I be more intentional about and get me thinking about what do I really want to do? Because the no could mean it just, it was like, it reminds me when you were saying that of that book from many years ago of Who Moved My Cheese, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, there's no cheese there. Okay, well, am I going to hang out and hope that there's cheese, or am I going to go find the cheese that I want? So being receptive to that gift and curious about it and what I want to do now to get myself focused. Because sometimes the thing that we're looking for is the goal is to get away from our current situation versus moving positively in the right direction. I'm not running away from something. I'm walking towards something.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually had gotten that feedback from a coach and a mentor in the past, right? When I was like, oh, I think I want to do something different. And that's exactly what it was like. Well, why? Like, are you running towards something or are you running away from something? And, and it sounds like such a cliche statement, but when you really sit there and you think about it, and if you're, like you said, intentional, right? I have a career journey, right? A journal. It's different than my personal journal. And, before I start the day every morning, like I'm writing, like, okay, what are my intentions today? Like, and not my to-do list, right? Not what am I going to work on? It's like, what am I going to be, more intentional about that will actually help me, in my career and what that looks like. And it supports, my career non-negotiable. So, that's also, when you're talking about intentionality, like there's that also intentionality of like, what do I need to focus on for myself? And it's completely different than your task list or your to-do list. But you talked about like closing that knowledge gap, right? And
Right.
those are some things that you work on and and you have to be intentional about being okay with receiving feedback, right? Raising your hand to say, hey, tell me what I can do better. Tell me what I can do differently, because that also helps. That's also being intentional with your career experience.
Yeah. So I'm going to try to summarize because this has been really helpful, right? So we all have an aspiration of what do we hope people at the end of our career, our last day, what do we hope people are saying about us, as we walk out of the building? And knowing that aspiration, then that's evergreen, right? That doesn't change. And then, okay, I have an ambition to achieve something in my current role and to move towards my next goal, towards my next role. And then the daily action, the regular action of what am I going to do today? What's today? How do I show up today that is in service of closing those gaps, learning what I need to learn, letting go of what I need to let go of, to make it easier for me to accelerate to that next role where I can live out that aspiration. So journaling to know, here's how I want to show up today, and here's what's important. Here's the experience that I want to bring, right? I'm not going to wait for it. I'm not going to look for it. I'm going to create it.
Absolutely.
Right? So that you know that you want that experience, and that becomes the non-negotiable. I want this kind of an experience at work in exchange for my investment of time and energy. This is what I want back in addition to a paycheck. I want this kind of an experience. And if you get clear on those non-negotiables, it's really easy to direct your career.
Oh,
Right? Boom, there it is.
Absolutely. And when your non-negotiables are not being met. And that's why I say you look at it like your career is like a relationship, right? You know when you're in that honeymoon phase, right? When you're in the phase where you're like, hey, we need to shake this relationship up a little bit. Like it's kind of getting a little stagnant, right? You know also when, hey, we may need to go our separate ways, right? Like, or hey, we shook it up and now we've rejuvenated the relationship. And so that's why I say it's like an experience, but it is also a relationship, right? And you take it and look at it as such. That's how you can be intentional about it, right? We're very intentional about our personal, we're very intentional about like our relationships, whether they're romantic or whether they're friendly. Take the same exact approach with your career.
Yeah, and we are each responsible for 100% of our 50% of the relationship, right?
Exactly.
So I'm not hanging out waiting for the company. The company, I tell the folks I coach, your company is full of wonderful, well-intending people, and no one is going to work harder at your development and your career than you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I love that you brought the 50-50 because that's exactly what it is. You're in a relationship with your company and it's up to you whether that relationship should continue, but it's a 50-50, right? You can't be solely relying on your company, solely relying on, your managers or senior leadership to make your career non-negotiables. Like there's work that you have to do as well.
Yeah, I love it. Tiffany, this has been great. I've learned a lot. I'm confident that everybody listening has learned a lot and got some tips about how to be much more proactive and intentional about managing their career and their development into leadership, if that's what they choose, or if they choose to be an SME and a great individual contributor for their career, whatever it is. I think that we've given them some great stuff to work with today. I'm really grateful for you being here and spending time with me and sharing your wisdom. I want to give you the final word. What are you grateful for today?
What am I grateful for today? I'm grateful for waking up, right? I think that's something that we take for granted, right? We just assume that we're going to wake up every morning. So I'm grateful for waking up, and I'm grateful for the opportunity, Greg. I'm really enjoyed, having this conversation with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. And thank you for listening to another episode of Ultra Leadership. If you're liking what you hear, please hit that like button. Tell your friends to subscribe. You can find us on all platforms where the podcast is also on YouTube now. So check out all of our other content. And we write a weekly newsletter on all things Ultra Leadership on LinkedIn every week. You can find us there. Just type in Ultra Leadership and you will find everything you need to right there on LinkedIn or on YouTube. So thank you again. And until next time, please keep moving forward. Find that edge. Raise your hand. Get yourself noticed, because that's where the good stuff happens. We'll see you next time.
If you're enjoying Ultra Leadership, please take a minute and give us a review wherever you find your podcasts. And please stay in touch. Sign up for our Ultra Leadership newsletter at ultraleadership.com. Now, before you jump to your next meeting, I invite you to reflect on what you heard today. What stood out for you? What insight might you want to incorporate into your leadership practice? Until next time, remember, as a leader, you always have the power to shape the future and change lives. So go to the edge and push farther. Thanks for listening.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.